And we're live.
We're live. Ground control.
Yeah.
Major Tom. We're
Have you
live.
got? Yeah. Have you got that on vinyl? Because that would have been a good intro. I'm not
I
sure
do
if we're
not
allowed
have
to
that
play music.
on vinyl.
Ah, there you go.
I have nothing. I was just checking. I have nothing spacey on vinyl. But we don't want. That's a bad one to play too. We don't want to.
No. Yeah.
You play the theme to Star Trek. That could be
Yeah.
yeah. But this is the opposite of what happened there, because in Star Trek they had like a 5-year mission, but it got canceled after 3 years. Whereas what we're talking about almost seems to be the opposite. People went from an 8-day mission to maybe half
I
a
mean,
year. So, yeah.
yeah. I mean, it might be a 5-year mission. We don't know. So we started talking about this, didn't we? When it first happened. So when was it? Was it in June? I think when Starliner's
July.
first crewed launch was it July?
It was July.
Yeah. So it's the first crewed launch of Starliner, and it's a test flight. There's been two previous unmanned autonomous launches. The first of which was a massive mistake because they set the mission clock wrong by about 12 hours, I think, and that one didn't work out, costing them billions of dollars. This is another big problem because what's happened, and we talked about this. So we were, I don't think this was really big in the news, but because I like space stuff and was trying to push the NASA issue of the podcast, we started talking about that. And I thought it was, it was just a little story at the time. They'd been beset by problems on the way up there. Some of their thrusters weren't working as expected. Managed to dock with the International Space Station, but now they're wondering how they're going to get home. So when did it dock with the ISS?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to. We should have.
We should have done some research.
Yeah, well, we can. Thank you, Internet. And you're right. I'm sorry, I said July like as if I knew, and it was.
So it was 10. It was 10th of June, 2024. Yeah.
Yeah, that's when they docked.
Yeah, and it was supposed to be an 8-day mission. Yes, and it's just a test mission. They were supposed to go on. The astronauts were supposed to board the ISS, dick around for a bit, and then come back home. But at the moment, because of the problems with the thrusters, there is a conversation between Boeing, who make Starliner, and NASA, who are in control of the mission, about whether it will be safe to bring the astronauts back. And I think that's an incredible story, don't you? Being stuck on a space station. And it's one of a few space rescue missions. Well, it might be a space rescue mission that's ever had to go, ever occurred in the history of space travel. So yeah, it's really quite exciting for me. So do you know what the options are, Chad, at the moment?
I think they could do they're trying to see if they can do some sort of spacewalk to assess the damage. I think that was something that they said they were thinking about at one point, but the information seems to be contradictory.
Yeah, so I listened. There was a big so NASA said they'd make a decision on its return by the middle of August, and the middle of August was this week. And so I not virtually attended. I listened into the press conference where NASA and Boeing were talking about the options. And so I think the current two options at the moment is either the astronauts return in Starliner as was originally proposed, yeah, or Starliner returns by itself autonomously, and the astronauts have to be rescued by a SpaceX Crew Dragon launch. I think in February they'll be coming back. And so those things, they haven't decided what they want to do yet, and it's one of those NASA things where they are stuck at the moment between commercial credibility and the safety of the astronauts. And so they're trying to work out that. So apparently the issues with the thrusters were fairly minor, they think, but they don't know. And so they're trying to work out if they can safely return in the spacecraft. And the get out, of course, it is a test flight. It was never meant to be, an operational test flight, but it's a massive disaster, I think, for Boeing, because their credibility is being. They've had problems anyway, haven't they, with the aircraft part of the business, and this is not doing them any good.
Well, okay, a massive disaster. I think I have to take a little objection to that, not because I want to be a Boeing fanboy, but they got there safely, so
that's good.
They didn't. So that's one part of it, and look, there's humans involved here, right? This isn't an unmanned mission. They're taking abundance of caution here to make sure that there's no loss of life, and they're putting safety before everything else. So I think if we're
But
going to start,
NASA hasn't always done that, though, hasn't it? So back in the space shuttle. So we'll talk a bit about the glorious Apollo 13 rescue mission. Yeah,
yeah,
failure was not an option, which was possibly the high point of NASA. But subsequent to that, we had the Challenger disaster, which happened on January the 28th, 1986, which I remember because it's my 14th birthday. And that whole disaster was a conflict, I think, between the commercial demands of the mission and safety, and they kind of ignored some of the safety implications, having been one of them, just because they needed to get the launch off. Yeah, because it's expensive business space, and that was perhaps the low point in the history of NASA, along with the Columbia disaster a few years later when another space shuttle blew up, this time because of damage on launch. And so then they knew that the space shuttle was perhaps critically damaged, but they couldn't do much about it because, at that stage it was in the wrong orbit to dock with the ISS. Didn't have a second space shuttle ready. Atlanta was almost being prepared to be ready, but wouldn't be ready in time before they ran out of supplies. And so they couldn't do anything to rescue those astronauts, and they had to bring them back. And of course, Columbia broke up on re-entry, and that was another disaster. And so those are massive learning opportunities, obviously, for NASA. And of course, we're dealing with a commercial space program now. It's not just NASA that's launching the rest. We have the Boeing have designed Starliner. We've got SpaceX, their competitors, might have to do the rescue mission. And that makes the whole thing really complicated. If you listen to the press release or the press conference, everybody was being really calm and rational. And the journalists were trying to ask, was there lots of disagreement? And they were saying, no, not really. We're just discussing it and we're just looking at the data at the moment. But the interesting thing for me is, one of the questions from the journalists is, you said you would give us a answer in the middle of August, and it's the middle of August now. Now you're pushing it off to the end of August. What possible new information could you get between now and when you have to make the decision? And they basically said, we're waiting on 3D modeling results, which for us is really interesting. I think almost none of the journalists picked up on that, because 3D modeling can be anything. But for me, that's almost certainly kind of CFD simulations and FEA simulations of the propulsion system. And they're waiting, and we all know, having been involved in simulation, that sometimes takes a long time, and so we'll talk a bit about that in my podcast about Apollo 13 and digital twin. And you kind of get the idea that digital twins are kind of instantaneously making decisions, but of course for difficult questions, CFD and FEA take a long time, and I guess that's what they're waiting for. We don't know for sure.
And there's also different scenarios they have to look at, right? Like, it's not, I mean, this is a highly complex situation in and of itself. We're not talking about something prior to, when we usually are talking to customers, it's prior to being put into operation most of the time. But this is something, it's in space. They have to look at a lot of factors. And I mean, the variables are changing constantly. So it's not like a static problem where they can say, well, this is the solution and this is the solution. What was a possibility 2 months ago may not be a possibility now. Things are evolving for different reasons here.
Yeah.
So it's not as simple, okay, just run the simulation, we're good to go. I mean, just to go back to the other examples you gave, I mean, Challenger and Columbia, terrible events. But I think that's we have to be careful about the double-edged swords here. Like, on one hand, those were terrible events, but we don't want to now criticize NASA and Boeing too much for taking the right amount of time, like making it seem like they're taking, why aren't you making a decision? Like, they're putting the time needed to make the right decision before giving a deadline that, okay, we're making a decision August 15th either way, right? So you can't have it both ways. You can't say, okay, this is the decision date and damn the whatever the outcome is, or but then criticize them for making the wrong decision, or then criticize them for taking time to make the right decision, right? I mean, there's just too much at stake here.
I wouldn't. Yeah, I wouldn't do that. I think they're doing exactly the right thing in taking their time and looking at the data. I think as an adult, yeah, and in situations much less complex than that, you just come to the conclusion that, you know, when you can't make decisions, it's because you don't have enough information, and clearly that's what they're doing. They're trying to get their information together, trying to do some more engineering simulation, I guess, and then they'll come to a conclusion.
It's also what you're risking too, right? Like you might not have the right information, but if you're risking, you know, nothing of consequence, then that's a gamble. But in this case, they know they're risking. I mean, putting aside human life, which is obviously, I think, even when you spoke to Space Mom, Nancy, you know, this is like of the highest concern for them, first and foremost, before anything else. But obviously, they're well aware that if it's a disaster, this is not going to be good for NASA or Boeing in terms of their ambitions going forward for the program either, right? So I don't think they're putting that before human life, but I don't think they're obviously leaving that at the door either, right? Like they have to do what's best. And I think, you know, just the fact that they're willing to put on the table the unmanned return of Starliner and let a competitor bring them back. I mean, that's kind of like the opposite of what you see like in, you know, those stereotypes in movies. Like, no, we have to do what's, you know, best for the company first type of thing, right? Like they're if there's a willingness even to just bring it back unmanned, which is maybe some people may take that as a failure. It is a success still because they're doing what's best and they're learning from what happened, and they're not putting the wrong thing as priority here. They're ensuring the safety of those two people first, and regardless of the other consequences that might bring. And I think that's kind of like a lot of skepticism about like commercial interest in being involved in space exploration, perhaps. I mean, that shows that there has to be cooperation amongst all the players, because anything could go wrong at any time for any of them going forward. This is a very difficult problem. It's a very difficult engineering problem. It's a very difficult environment. They have to cooperate once we're looking at space exploration, because this could have easily happened to somebody else. I mean, even if we're assuming it's a design flaw because it was the test run, but you know, Challenger and Columbia, they were not maiden voyages. So, you know, just because things go off without a hitch the first time doesn't mean down the line there can't be potential issues.
And that and the point is, it is a test flight, and it's supposed to iron out some of these wrinkles. And like you say, it did dock, despite the fact it did manage to dock, and the astronauts are safe. And so it's an interesting situation with them stuck on the ISS for a bit, but at least they're safe, and they, you know, that it's not without risk. And I think that's one of the other stories that came out in the press conference is leaving them there to February and bringing them back on an unmanned Crew Dragon SpaceX flight. Is also, there's risks involved in doing that as well. I mean, and you have to say these astronauts are top professionals, test pilots, you know, brilliant people, but they're trained on the Starliner platform, not trained on the SpaceX platform. And even though it's like jumping on a bus and the whole thing can fly autonomously and does fly autonomously, still you think that there must be some safety implications about being on a platform that you're not trained for. I don't know what those are, but definitely they can't come back in their existing spacesuits, because the Crew Dragon spacesuits are completely different, and so they have to send up. I just love the idea they're sending up a fresh pair of spacesuits for them to change into, and of course those will all be branded with SpaceX as well, which is also another commercial challenge. But addressing your big point, you know, even ignoring the loss of human life, which is tragic for the people and the families involved, that would be a commercial disaster, a massive disaster commercially for NASA and for Boeing, and would put, you know, these are supposed to be relatively run-of-the-mill routine operations, getting people up and down to the International Space Station, which is what Starliner is designed for, and what SpaceX is already doing for years and years and years. Since the space shuttle program, we've been relying on Russian Soyuz rockets to ferry people back and forth to the ISS, and it's like, it's not in space travel, it's not a difficult thing to do, and our ambitions are much wider than this, because we've got the Artemis project to take people back to the moon in the next few years, you know, and build a space station around the moon, have routine landings to the moon, and also kind of the Elon Musk SpaceX ambition to go to Mars. And so if we're failing at this level and losing human life in the relatively easy stuff, it puts everything into question, I think.
Like the grander scheme, the grander plan.
Yeah, and which is why I can't I'm not an expert in this, and I'm just speculating. But I can't imagine that they're gonna make a decision to bring them back if there's any doubt at all. I think that the safest option to me seems obviously to let it come back unmanned. Yeah, which is interesting in itself, because we're going to have to watch, a potentially damaged spacecraft come back. Either it will land safely, and it could have been, "Oh, told you so," if you're right, or it won't land safely. They have to deal with that disaster, but then at least can say, "Look, we saved the 2 astronauts by making the right decision." So that whole thing's going to unroll, and it's going to be it's really interesting. I mean, this is one of the things I love about space and digital twins. I love trying to solve these problems remotely. Is a really, really difficult thing to do.
But there's two things that you said that I want to say. One, I don't think it's as routine as it may seem. I know we've been able for decades to have people go up and down to the space station and do launches. But I think because it seems like it's the most frequent thing that's happened and lots of nations do it now, it comes across as maybe easy, but it's not. It's even just that. And before we even get into further space exploration beyond just that and going to the moon and further, and that is still difficult. And maybe we've gotten better at it. Maybe we've optimized it or figured out a lot of it, after initial issues when we started with this in the 60s and 70s. But I don't think it's remotely routine or as simple as flying a plane.
But that's
still a lot of back.
But that's the ambition, though, isn't it? The ambition is that we're gonna be able to routinely, and we've been trying for that for most of my lifetime. I can remember being in primary school and watching one of the early space shuttle launches. I think the first one at school, when I was a small child. And the whole point of space shuttle was it's supposed to be a routine. And it never was. It was expensive and it was difficult, and and it demonstrated that this is not an easy thing to do. And I think Starliner is also proving that it's not an easy thing to do. I think the back to all this is, of course, is SpaceX do make it look routine and do have ironed out all the problems and do frequently have their test rockets blow up, because that's part of their development kind of approach, is like test and fail, test and fail, test and fail. But they do have a robust process for getting here. And of course, the Russians have a robust process for getting there with Soyuz as well. So yeah, it's a test flight.
But there's another aspect to this that it can't be ignored either. If we are going to do these further, explorations onto the moon or further in the galaxy, whatever it is, as we build up more infrastructure, well, the more that's out there, the more stock that's out there, the more humans that are out there, well, there is more chance of things going wrong. There is more chance of failure. So being able to correct failure or to address issues remotely in that environment is a problem we will have to solve. Because we will not be always able to send up a replacement rocket, or these are long distances. It could be beyond, like we mentioned for Columbia, it could be too late by the time relief could come. So the ability to see if we can troubleshoot, problem solve, address issues there and then is part, I think, of what the exercise is going on, because that's the only way this type of exploration is going to be viable. It's not going to be viable if we always have to call home and wait for relief to come days, if not longer, to reach. So this figuring out how to address issues like this, even if it takes time, I think is key to addressing some of the challenges that come with exploring our solar system even further.
Well, especially deep space. Remember, this is low Earth orbit, basically. So this is our local. We've been doing this, like you say, for decades, and the risk should be more understood. But like you say, it's new technology. It's the third crewed launch of Starliner. Iron out the problems, and hopefully we're going to have 2 competing methods for getting people up and back. And it's fantastic. We've already got SpaceX here, or potentially even Soyuz, but I guess they're not going to be used here because when the Americans and Russians don't get on as well as they used to, nobody gets on as well with the Russians as they used to. So it's good that we've got multiple options for doing this, and that they haven't been completely stranded. Yeah. It's not the first time it's happened as well. It's because, there was an astronaut after Columbia blew up. There was an astronaut who got stranded for longer than expected at the ISS, because he was supposed to come back on a space shuttle, but not Columbia. And of course, when all the space shuttles got grounded, he had to wait for longer, and got being brought back by the Russians. So it's not the first example of somebody coming back from space or from the ISS in a different vehicle than he arrived in. So,
no, but I think in that case, like you said, it was more that they canceled the return, not he arrived on something that could
well,
not.
it was he arrived in different, but he was supposed to come back on a shuttle and he came back on a Soyuz. So it's a pretty in a similar situation, you know.
Some situation, but he didn't. The shuttle, he wasn't meant to come back on something. He didn't arrive on something like this. In this case, then got stranded there because the vessel itself, it was the return, initial planned return was not going to take place, and they had to reschedule him on something else, which is still, you know, he had to stay there longer. But this is what's unique about this is that they're in a holding pattern because of all this, and it's not even clear for sure. I mean, February. I mean, we know these things sometimes get pushed. February could turn into April. You know, these launches are scheduled, but there's all sorts of reasons why they get pushed back for various reasons. So February is what's planned, but that could not easily could slip into further into 2025. But I think it's the unique situation of being like these in this holding pattern of will they, won't they, what's going on, and so much we don't know that we're speculating about, right? Because I mean, they released some information to the public, but you know, we're speculating as to maybe what's going on in their decision making and what they're looking at in terms of the variables here. It is a fascinating story because we're also at that point with everything in this phase of space exploration, right? Like we're trying to get things back to routine and regular, you know, trips there and to the moon. Like we're trying to that's the goal by the end of this decade. So like this is where we are, and we're just at that point where we need to see these things start going smoothly if we expect things to stay on track towards the end of the 2020s for further exploration and bringing Artemis and other programs up to full speed.
Mm-hmm. So next year, when is the next Artemis mission supposed to be? Which is the one that well, the plan is Artemis 3 is supposed to land astronauts on the moon in 2023. So yeah, Artemis 2 is scheduled for this year, which is going to be kind of the Apollo 8 trip around the moon without landing and coming back, which I also find exceptionally exciting as well. So we're looking to go to the moon next year. So there's going to be lots of stuff going on in space, and it's the most exciting time, I think, since the 1970s when I was born.
It is. I mean, I remember Challenger as well when it occurred. I was the initial Apollo missions were before my time. I remember with the Challenger accident. I remember Columbia. It is. I guess this is kind of like the second coming, I guess, or second wave of such interest. And you know, there was always been, I guess, continuous activity, but there's a lot of hope here of what will be coming in the later part of this decade. And I guess there's a lot of concern that maybe there was overpromise as well in terms of the timeline and ability and maybe, you know, I mean, it was all projected dates, right? I mean, and projects. I mean, do you think if we end up not at what point do you think they may just say, well, you know, this is going to be, it's going to become too much time, too much money, too much.
Well, we've got presidential elections in November, which I think, you know, I'm not sure what Donald Trump's position on NASA is, but that's going to be a big question, isn't it? What happens with funding? Funding's always a big problem for NASA, and whether any of that stuff gets canned. So we'll have to see what happens.
It's not just NASA, right? Like there's SpaceX, there's Boeing. Well, like, what point do these commercial partners, you know, start to say, hey, you know, we're trying and we're investing, you know, money and time, and it's just not, they're not achieving what they could.
SpaceX seems to be working, you know, very well and delivering on lots of levels, but you know, like you say, we're still doing the low Earth orbit stuff when we're talking about deep space stuff. Maybe that will be different. So SpaceX is almost designed for that. Boeing, of course, have got other interests, and it's not all about space travel. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just trying to see what. Sorry, I'm just googling something.
Do you think would you go? Let's say in a decade there was a possibility.
Yeah.
Would you take?
If I was younger, I would. Not anymore. I don't think. No. I'm a bit more risk averse these days. I'm a pretty, I'll take lots of risks, but for me, I don't think the reward is
But
enough.
isn't it at one point you go like, well, you know what? I've lived my life.
Tourism, maybe.
You
Maybe
know,
you're
like,
like,
you've done everything. Like, what's left to do? Oh, I'll go to Spain.
well, sometimes
That's
you
a
can
long
have
time for you.
your
You got
human remains. If you're cremated, you can have your remains blast off into space, can't you? That's more, at my stage in my life, that's more appealing to me than going up myself. So I don't know.
Really, I feel like instead of
I
like
used to
planting
love
a
roller
tree in your
coasters, but I don't
backyard, you
know.
could be a
As you get
star.
older, things hurt more. Yeah. So apparently Donald Trump, this is what I was Googling, has prioritized returning American astronauts to the moon. So maybe if they do elect him, it won't be bad for NASA funding. So we'll have to see. I don't understand American politics enough to even comment on that. So
Let's
maybe
stay away from that
politics.
topic.
Yeah. So in terms of the podcast this week, I've been working. So I wrote a blog a few years ago, which basically is about Apollo 13 and the Apollo 13 rescue mission, which kind of proposes that Apollo 13 was the first use of a digital twin, which it's not really. It's a bit of a stretch, but it's a story of how engineering saved those astronauts and how they used things which were very similar to digital twins to save the astronauts on the Apollo 13 mission. What that blog is easily the most popular one I've ever written. And if you Google now, I think if you Google what was the first digital twin, that my blog comes up on the second or third page of it. So what we've done is I've extended that and turned it into a podcast. So it's an audio version with some excerpts from the Apollo 13 mission as well. And I'm going to be releasing that on Wednesday. So you can look at how NASA saved the last lot of astronauts who were properly stranded in space and who weren't on a comfy International Space Station, but were on a basically broken rocket using the lunar module to lander module to live in. Yeah. And so I'm going to tell that story. And it's like normally with engineer innovation, we do interviews and we talk to guests, but this is a more of a documentary style one where we look at all the issues and used audio from the missions and things to tell the story. So that's quite exciting as well. So you can listen to that on Wednesday, and hopefully later next week, I'm going to try and write a blog which brings together Starliner, brings together the Apollo 13 rescue, and brings together the conversation we had from Nancy from NASA, who is a mission assurance specialist as well, and talked about a lot of this stuff in an abstract sense. And I'm going to see if we can get some of the lessons that she taught us and pull it together in a blog for later this week. But on Wednesday, you'll be able to listen to the NASA Apollo 13 issue of the Engineer Innovation Podcast, which is something I'm very proud of.
You should be. I've had the privilege of listening to it. It's a great episode for sure. It's like you said, different style than our typical episode, but it's very revealing. You did a great job getting the historical context and bringing in digital twins that.
And we usually release an episode of Engineer Innovation every other week, don't we? But we've done one, I think, in August deliberately because it's the summer. But we're coming back with I think a episode every week during September. That's mainly because we're glad to be back, but also because we're trying to get recommissioned, and we need to meet our targets, which we're pretty close to, but we want to get lots more episodes, and we've been working on some over the summer. So hopefully there'll be other good episodes coming out in September, including a very exciting one that you recorded last week.
Yes, there's and something else we haven't done a lot of. We have a 2-part episode coming out in September. I don't know how much we want to tease it until it's out.
But there are connections to a very, very popular viral TV show
involved with that show too.
Space.
There are shows,
and
episodes,
science,
there's space
and physics.
There's lots of things. It's a great episode, and it's not just about space, but there's space involved. What else can we say about it?
I think we should just tease it. It's to do with what for me, the most exciting TV. I'm not a big TV watcher, but there was a massive series this year about space, about science, and it's to do with that. Is somebody involved with that and talking about engineering and simulation and things? So that will be exciting as well. So hopefully that will be the big episode together.
We'll get more details in the next live.
Yeah. All right.
Maybe we'll have more information about
The next slide's probably not going to be on a Sunday, mate, as well. You know.
No, well, yeah, that's my fault. I'm traveling, and Stephen graciously gave up a Sunday afternoon to do the live because I was being difficult again with my schedule and couldn't do it this week. And we said, hey, you know what? People might forget we're doing this, so let's do a live. Let's do something. Let's remind them that we're still around. And you got your great episode coming out this Wednesday, and yeah.
And I think the interesting thing about this Dream Starliner story is that it's going to run for a while, isn't it? You know, there's going to be a resolution one way or another, and so we'll have an opportunity to talk more about it. But you know, I just love that the thing that they're waiting for at the moment. I think they're waiting for engineering simulation results to help them make a decision, which kind of validates all that we do. So, and yeah, like you said, absolutely, kudos to NASA and for Boeing for not rushing into a decision and making the proper decision based on engineering, because that's what we're all about.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about Apollo 13. I mean, that was, that problem that they solved at the time. They had a fraction of the computing power and tools that we have today. Human ingenuity.
A very, very, very small fraction.
Yeah, no, but that's the thing. Human ingenuity overcame the issues, and we talk a lot about our reliance on different technologies, but when it comes right down to it, human ingenuity is still the most powerful collectively, maybe not individually, but collective. Human ingenuity is probably still the biggest computational force there is, even if we have tools like AI and supercomputing. You can't beat the creativity of human ingenuity, I think, still.
And engineer innovation.
And you, my friend.
Yeah.
But I'll let you get back to your Sunday.
I'm going to go and sit in the garden, man.
So how in the garden, have a spot of tea.
Yes.
And it's low. Is it high tea or low tea today?
I don't even know what the difference between those things are. It was we had my wife's belated birthday celebrations with the family yesterday, and I drank an enormous amount of Pimm's. So all I will be drinking is tea because I woke up with a hangover.
Oh, well, you could have kept that to yourself. But
Pimm's is more quintessentially English than high tea or low tea, I think so, especially in the summer. All right.
Enjoy your garden. Enjoy your tea. Talk to you soon. Thank you for watching, guys.
Bye.
Listen to the episode that drops Wednesday. Bye.
Bye. Like, follow, share.